Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German theologian, a pastor and the founder of the Confessing Church. Bonhoeffer was apprehended for plotting the assassination of Adolf Hitler just a few days before the fall of Hitler. Though a pastor, Bonhoeffer saw it fit and necessary to have Hitler killed for the betterment of the life of Jews. He writes in one of his books entitled Life Together. He states that Christianity means community through Jesus Christ and in Jesus Christ. No Christian community is more or less than this. Whether it be a brief single encounter or daily worship of years, Christian community is only this. We belong to one another only through and in Jesus Christ. What does this mean? It means first that a Christian needs others because of Jesus Christ. It means second that a Christian comes to others only through Jesus Christ. In the same vein, Paul writes in the book of Galatians chapter 2, verse 11 to 16. It reads, "When Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they arrived, he began to draw back and separate himself from the Gentiles, because he was afraid of those who belonged to the circumcision group. The other Jews joined him in his hypocrisy, so that by their hypocrisy even Barnabas was led astray. When I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas in front of them all, 'You are a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile and not like a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs? We who are Jews by birth and not Gentiles know that a person is not justified by the works of the law, but by faith in Jesus Christ, so that we too have put our faith in Christ, that we may be justified by faith in Christ and not by the works of the law, because by the works of the law no one will be justified.'" The term that Paul uses in the intro of the book of Galatians shows that Paul has got an important and urgent message to address. In chapter 1, he introduces himself as an apostle, thus showing his qualification to address the Galatians. And Paul states in chapter 1 that the Galatians should not believe any other gospel besides the one that they have been preached for. In chapter 2, Paul mentions how he was accepted as the true apostle chosen by God and not a liar. Because at the time that Paul was preaching, there were false prophets who were preaching against the true gospel. In verse 11 to 16, of which will be the key focus of the sermon, the apostle tells us of an incident that happened in Antioch. In verse 11, Paul goes on his refutation of the false prophet by saying that in Antioch he confronted Peter in the presence of the whole congregation. As it stated before, Paul has no small matter to address, but the chief article of Christian religion is at stake, the true gospel. When this article is endangered, we must not hesitate to resist Peter. Paul paid no regard to the dignity and position of Peter. When he saw the gospel in danger, he acted in its defense. However, Paul, in his defense of the true gospel, he did not sever his relationship with Peter. In his pronouncing that Peter is in the wrong, he employs a Greek word, kateknomenos, which expresses that Peter might have been in the wrong all along for a long time. But when Paul addresses him, he repents and stops the hypocrisy. It is our duty as student pastors that we protect the true gospel, that we do not compromise the true gospel. If we do not falter, we will be sure to keep everyone around us safe in the true gospel. Paul's public confrontation also teaches us that it is dangerous to assume that just because someone holds a position of prominence at church means that they are infallible and thus cannot sin. Peter, as an apostle, is in the wrong, and thus it is expedient that Paul addressed him in public to protect the gospel. Keeping quiet when the gospel is compromised may lead to the compromise and the distortion of the gospel, thus turning the gospel into what it is not. It is up to us as future pastors to hold true to the claims of the gospel, lest we victimize members of the churches that we'll be working with. In verse 12, Paul states that some men came from James, and before these men had arrived, Peter had a habit of eating with the Gentiles who had converted into Christianity. However, Peter changed his behavior, and the change was not on the basis of principle, but because he feared a group of men who had arrived in Antioch. Peter at this point has let fear get the best of him. As a result, behaves as a hypocrite. He relapses back to Judaism and denies the true gospel. Though Peter had received a vision in Acts chapter 10, in the vision Peter is encouraged to eat animals that the Jews believed were unclean, and thus he is led to the house of Cornelius, a Gentile, so that he may give him the true gospel. At this point, Peter learns Gentiles are eligible to receive the gospel. But when Peter sees the men from James, who are presumed to be the Jewish Christians, he compromised the gospel. Before Peter's hypocrisy, Peter and Paul held the same position when it came to the matter of the gospel. When the circumcision group had arrived, Peter fell victim to the belief that Christians are justified by the Jewish culture of circumcision and following the dietary cultural practices of Jews. It may happen sometimes in our lives that we face a time of social pressure to such an extent that we are compelled to neglect the true gospel and thus display hypocrisy. Will we be a Paul to our fellow Christians and be ready to tell the truth of the gospel in love, or will we be a Peter and display hypocrisy? In verse 13, we are informed that there are some who followed Peter's bad example and diffused themselves from the Gentile congregation. The action of one can lead many astray. It is also interesting to see that even those whom we can say they were pillars of establishing the church in Antioch, such as Barnabas, whom worked with Paul as evangelist, succumbed to the pressure. It's like a domino effect. After all the time of neatly putting the pieces together, one wrong move, one moment of distraction, and all of it can come down falling. The future pastors and a people who will work for the church, we should be careful. We should be careful that we do not mislead God's people in our actions and in our behavior with regards to the gospel. In verse 14, we find out that Paul refers to the Gentiles as sinners, and he refers to Jews as those that are not sinners. The reason Paul uses this language is to demarcate the difference between the Jews, the Jewish Christians, and the Gentiles that were living in Antioch. The Jewish Christians were coming from a culture of knowing who God is. The Galatians that were Gentiles had beliefs in pagan gods. So in this context, Paul is trying to differentiate and furthermore to make a point that just because the Jews knew God, it does not place them in a better position as compared to the Gentiles when it comes to justification. We should be careful not to mix the gospel with our own customs and cultures, lest we distort the gospel and in the process burden people of God with practices that are not even in the Bible. In the book of Acts, the apostles had agreed to make sure that they do not burden the Gentiles with the Jewish customs, but they give the gospel in its purest form. In verse 15, Paul addresses him and those that are listening as true Jews. And he's rehearsing what Peter knew already and believed. Paul clearly expresses that Peter was acting contrary to his conviction. Paul reminds Peter and all those who were observing that a person is justified only by faith in Christ. Paul's statement in verse 15 informs us that if Paul and the Jewish Christians, as much as Paul and the Jewish Christians may be Christian, it does not place them in a better position with regards to justification, because justification comes only through faith in Jesus Christ. The phrase faith in Jesus Christ occurs 3 times in verse 16. It has been argued that Paul is not just repeating himself. The first and the third time of the phrase refers to the faithfulness of Christ, and the second instance to the believer. The Greek word pistos Christo may be referred as a genitive, and thus verse 16 would read as follows: knowing that a person is justified not through works of the law, but through Jesus. And we have come to believe in Jesus Christ, so that we might be justified by Christ's faith and not of works. The true gospel does not choose ethnicity, denomination, or race or gender. All are welcome to be Christians on the basis of faith in Jesus Christ. Paul states that there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ. Galatians chapter 3 verses 20. As Christians, we should not let denominationalism divide us, because we believe in one Christ who justifies us freely out of his love and not by any merit of our works. We are here because we have decided to follow Christ, that we might be justified. The true way of becoming Christians is to be justified by faith in Jesus Christ and not by the works of the law. We know that we must also teach good works, but they must be taught in their proper turn. When the discussion is concerning works and not the article of justification. Here the question arises, by what means are we justified? We answer with Paul, by faith only in Jesus Christ are we pronounced righteous, and not by works. Not that we reject good works, far from it, but we will not allow ourselves to be removed from the anchorage of our salvation. The law is a good thing, but when it comes to the discussion about justification, there is no time to drag it in. When it comes to the discussion, when we discuss justification, we ought to speak of Christ and the benefits that he brings to our lives. Christ is no sheriff. He is the Lamb of God which takes away the sins of the world. John chapter 1 verses 29. Thus we might be justified by the faith of Christ and not by the works of the law. I do not mean to say that the law is bad. Only it is not able to justify us. To be at peace with God, we have need of a far better mediator than Moses or the law. We must know that we are nothing. We must understand that we are merely beneficiaries and recipients of the treasures of Jesus Christ. Amen.